Uh, so sounds like it's good enough to get maybe a second mistress.
Ah, a second mistress. Jesus, I don't even have a first. I don't know. We've just got into more stringent lockdowns. I don't think that would even be possible at this point. The government has actually banned sex between people of households that don't live together. Unironically, I'm not even joking.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we are essentially a Sharia compliant state at this point.
That's that seems like that'd be a little bit hard to enforce.
It's wild, isn't it? It's fucking wild. Get your neighbours to snitch because you went and shagged your girlfriend.
Jeez, they're gonna need some kind of incentive program to get that to work. All right.
Yeah.
So, anyone that doesn't know yet, we're here with Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, uh, prolific YouTuber and debater, and I guess without any further ado, we'll jump right into questions here. Um,
Sure.
so, first one I had, what's your dream car?
I don't really have one, to be honest. I'm not really a car person, so I don't really have any particular dream car. Although I've got to say, Jaguars are quite nice. I like the way they feel.
All right, and Bob had a question. If you had to, so there's no weaseling out of this one. If you had to play Mario Kart 64, which character would you choose?
I always used to go for Toad for some reason. I remember playing this years ago, but I can't remember what the reason was. I think he might have been like hyper maneuverable or something like that. But
Uh,
it's certainly not any of the sort of like bigger ones that were really slow and clumsy.
all right, and then we got a question from Tan. Tan asks, despite being a strong supporter, do you have any strong concerns about Brexit?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not going to be easy, but the path worthy of being travelled rarely is it? What do you get at the end of it? I mean, when people say it's about the journey and not the destination, they're not wrong, because it's how you as a person, and in this case it'll be as a country, change along the way. But I think that what Brexit really is a kind of assertion of British values and views on independence and how our country should and who our country should be governed by. And this, like, I think this is something that, despite the difficulties, is going to be worth it in the end, or at least I goddamn well hope so. I mean, it has been for the last 1,000 years, so I don't see why it wouldn't be the same going forward in the next 1,000 years. I think that there are going to be loads of difficulties, and there will, especially given how we've set ourselves up with the lockdowns and the coronavirus, where I'm not sure if it's 20 or 30% of our economy has just been shaved off, and so far we've only secured about 15% of our trade in trade deals. So yeah, there will be rough times ahead, but we have faced worse. We will be fine out of it.
All right. Next question we have is from Alex Picard. He asks if you could tell us what you think of Vaush as a person versus his role as a debater.
Well, I mean, Vorsh's debater is actually he's actually a very fine debater, as many of the kind of lefty bros from Reddit often are, because they commit to a narrative, whether the narrative is true or false, and whether it can be demonstrated to be true or false. The commitment to the narrative and the intensity by which this can be remembered is the victory condition, and Vorsh is very good at this. And so he finds himself defending with remarkable passion uh, indefensible positions. And I mean, after his debate with Destiny about Kyle Rittenhouse, he looked like embarrassed. But when afterwards he got off of the debate and he was like, I think I did okay there. I think I defended our position okay there. Something to that effect. But it was obvious that this is not a position that he genuinely wanted to have to defend. No, you've got to let the mob of Antifa pedos beat you to death in case there's a pile of dead Antifa pedos at the end of it. It's like, no, sorry, it doesn't matter how many of them there are. But the point is, that wasn't the question. The question was really about Vorsh's commitment and I don't want to say extremism, but that's kind of what it is. Like, fundamentalism, sort of dogmatism to pure leftist ideals, even to the point where they will conflict so heavily with reality that even Destiny's like, okay, that's mad. With Destiny, I find there was a great example when Destiny jumped into my not Christmas election stream this year in November. So when he started asserting a bunch of facts that we didn't agree with, and we would bring up things to show him that actually he's not correct on a bunch of points in which his narrative had been based, and he started flipping out. He didn't take any time to consider this, and so this and he got really heated, and we weren't in an aggressive mood at all, because this was before the votes were paused and a bunch of boxes of ballots for Biden had come in. So Trump was doing really, really well. So we were all in a good mood because it looked like Trump was getting the landslide that we'd predicted. And so we weren't being really aggressive. It's just Destiny was just saying a bunch of false stuff, and he was saying it really assertively. And then he kind of jettisoned. So it was like, right, okay, that's weird. But if the competition is about purely a sort of an ability to commit to a series of statements, whether they're right or wrong, and then maneuver around that, which your opponent, because you're in these sort of shared lefty spaces, they all agree to this shared set of facts. If there are facts outside of that they don't agree to, then they can't have the debate. So debate-wise, these guys are amazing, right? They are, because very rarely is a debate about actual persuasion, about actually interrogating the circumstances. It's about front. It's about what you put up. And these lefty debate guys can put up a very good front, but the substance of what they're saying is terrible. But either way, but then on a personal level, well, I mean, what seems to be good about them? Like, what do they advocate that isn't a descent into just raw Coomerism? What would they consider virtues to be? And they would appeal something very abstract that you couldn't really see within yourself. And that annoys me, because virtue is self-evident. You don't need to tell someone you have a virtue. People can see that you have a virtue. If people constantly see you at the food bank every Friday handing out free food, you don't need to tell people that you do that, because they see you doing it. That's what. Where's so-and-so on Friday? Oh yeah, he's down helping the homeless, isn't he? Right, of course. God, maybe we should help the homeless. Yeah, good point. Maybe we should do something. I mean, he's always doing this. I mean, Christ, this is what virtue is. It's an example that you lead by. And I don't think these guys give much of an example to lead by. I had a debate with Destiny and Hassan Piker, in which I began it because I'd just been reflecting on this. This was just something I found strange. It's like, how we need to be able, in the face of left-wing attacks on Western civilization, be able to morally justify our own civilization. And I thought it was wild that it came to this, and I wanted to know if Destiny and Hassan had anything on this. And both Destiny and Hassan essentially just kind of shuffled their feet and were like, well, I guess we can't. And it's just like, okay, so if you can't, like, how do you explain to your son that, this? How do you explain to him that you've brought him into what is essentially an evil civilization, Destiny? It's just mad. It's absolutely mad. And why would you think of yourself as not evil if you were a product of an evil civilization? How would you think that you have a moral compass that would give you something that was worthy? And if you do find yourself with something worthy, how is it that not something that being in the civilization in which you currently are in has facilitated? And so how evil can it be? How unworthy can it be if people can attain your perfect, well-established moral framework? How evil can the civilization really be, even if it isn't crafted in exactly the same way you want? Because surely an evil civilization would just stamp out these ideas and would never let them rise. It would persecute people, thought police. But yeah. But anyway, I don't see much virtue in them, really, and I don't think they see much virtue in themselves. But the debate skills are very high.
So I think I might have missed something there. Do you believe that we're in an evil civilization?
I don't know.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But I asked them, what were the redeeming features of Western civilization, essentially, and they didn't have any answers. It's like, right, okay, surely you guys being communists when the dominant civilization isn't communist and not shooting you in the head is a redeeming feature of Western civilization. That would be bad, wouldn't it? Like, so there's a redeeming tolerance. Political toleration, I would have thought, would have been one of the redeeming factors they could have given us, but they didn't have any, so never mind.
All right, gotcha. Um, so that butts into our next question from Lil Bill. Was the election rigged?
Well, I mean, I intend to post this recording on YouTube after this, so not to the point where it helped Donald Trump to win. I don't doubt that Joe Biden just had a massive groundswell of natural support. I mean, it was clearly that Obama was holding him back. That's what it was. Everyone wanted to vote for the old white patriarch, but I guess they couldn't with the black guy there. And I'm not saying that's good. I think that's terrible. I would have voted for Obama if I were in America in 2008. I think he was the persuasive candidate, and he got 69 million votes. But Joe Biden getting 81 million, man, that is stunning. That is just mind-boggling how popular Joe Biden is compared to just the last, say, 4 presidents. It's wild. I don't know what his secret is. Like, how did that? Didn't he only win like something like 430 districts as well? I'll check that at some point, because I saw graphics going around saying, Obama got 69 million, won like 800 districts. Biden got 81 million and got 400 districts. It's like, wow, yeah, that's really gets the noggin jogging. And it's like, how do you explain that? And that's the thing. Like, credible political analysts who work for the Wall Street Journal and all this have to explain why Biden had 34% no down ballots on the votes. Like, why was Biden just so goddamn popular? And everyone sat there scratching their head going, wow, I don't know, because in every other respect, the Democrats got fucked, absolutely fucked by the Republicans, and specifically by Trump. That's what was happening. It wasn't like some sort of, they've discovered, like, Ben Shapiro's conservatism. No, it's Trump not bending the knee. That's what it was. Everyone liked it. Pure, raw, unabashed, unironic Americana, sincere. Trump genuinely loves America, and he genuinely believes in what he's saying, and he actively opposes the model of the sort of international administrative state. He opposes this. He's like the America First type. And I think that's a really popular position in America, like it is in every single country, to be that country first for your leaders. It's a very popular position in every single goddamn country. And yet we still somehow end up with globalists in charge of everything. I don't know. I guess people just love watching Joe Biden rake in those bucks from China. I guess they love it. I just don't like it. He did such a good job with Hunter Biden. I want that man in charge. He is the kind of father I want for the nation. Like, it's no, definitely no cheating though. Definitely no cheating.
All right, there. Oh God, how to say his name? Faz Raja, Roja, whatever their name is. They ask, do you believe the right are being censored, and if so, why?
Obviously, because literally everyone you can talk about who is a prominent voice in the public dialogue on whatever subject that has been permanently suspended from any platforms is on what is considered to be the right. And it starts with the most extreme right, which, I mean, I don't really like associating the fascists with like the American Republicans because they're antithetical to one another. You can't really be a Republican and be a fascist, because fascism is total domination of society by the state, whereas republicanism is literally the domination of the state by society. So they're just not the same. So when they say, oh, far right, and assume they're talking like Richard Spencer's a lot more like a Democrat from 100 years ago. Like, he's not really someone aligned with sort of Republican values. So, but anyway, if like the Republicans are meant, the hardcore ones like Alex Jones, the 1776ers, if they're the far right, I mean, they were the first to go. The Proud Boys have all gone. Alex Jones has gone. Gavin McGuinness has gone. Like, the Parler is just populated with a bunch of like hardcore Republicans, and it's great to be a part of. To be honest, I'm watching it and enjoying it, and just watching them saying stuff that, because I'm used to being on YouTube and like on the Silicon Valley platforms, I'm just like, I would never say this. I mean, like, Christ, it's full on stuff. but they can there. But they're not people who want Nazism or anything like that. But name the left wing content creators that have been targeted by Silicon Valley, and I mean a bunch of them may have been caught up in the grand sweep where the algorithm goes through and scythes through the content creators. YouTube bragged about deplatforming 8,000 accounts, 8,000 people the other day, and it's like, oh, well done, bravo, you've sanitized the platform from 8,000 people who were spreading dangerous wrongthink or something. Oh, good, well done. But there have been left-wing creators who have been caught up in this and have had their channels, or videos demonetized, or have otherwise been censored and suppressed. And often these people will have a stay of grace from their final execution in the digital firing squad, and will have themselves restored. This happened to Hassan Piker, as he was it? Didn't he? Oh no, it was Vaush that called for the destruction of Israel. That got him banned off Twitch. But I mean, to be fair, that really he kind of deserved that, didn't he? By the standard of the day. But Hassan had said something that America deserved 9/11, and he only got like a week's ban or something. It's like, really? Okay, that's impressive, because if you misgender someone on Twitter, you can get a permanent ban. And again, if you want to talk about how these things are deliberately biased, there is only one political movement in all of human history that gives a flying fuck about your pronouns. That's intersectionalism. So now, if you're going to sit there and go, well, you have to use pronouns as people dictate them on Twitter. That necessitates you putting them in your bio, because everyone, if you want people to be considerate of your fellow Twitter users, you don't want them accidentally or mistakenly getting banned, then you've got to do that for their sake. But it's also shows that all they do, this is a kind of left-wing Sharia. I don't care about pronouns. I never use someone's pronouns to them personally. You're always talking about them to someone else. And so in the course of a Twitter conversation, if you say she rather than he to someone else about the original post, the person who tweeted, you find yourself banned. It's like, okay, that's mad. Like, this is such an unbelievable left-wing bias. It's baked into the very rules of these things. And notice that none of these things are about challenging left-wing status quo either. Look at YouTube's current guidelines. You cannot say anything about the coronavirus vaccine that isn't basically approved by the Globo Homo diversity the diversity corporate hegemony of the world. The same one that's dropping rainbow bombs on Iraq now. Like these people are all in bed with all of the same views, and they're all promoting all of this intersectional nonsense. And I don't think any of them really have any particular knowledge about the thing. They just know that it's the right thing to do, and it's dumb. But yeah, it's all right wingers, because the right wing have a different philosophical framework, and this has been made verboten, basically.
All right. So for anyone that's hopped in recently, if you want to ask questions, write them in Sargon AMA. If you'd like to discuss, you can discuss along in AMA discussion. And if you want to invite your friends, it's discord.gg/bluepolitics. Now, I've got to ask, because I've only ever heard this term used in jest. What is the Globo Homo? What does that mean?
Oh, I some sort of reference to global corporations and the culture, the homogenizing culture that is that is essentially turning New York into London, into Paris, into all of these other sort of major world cities, where they're not tied to the countries in which they're in, really, from any cultural perspective. They're just these kind of international economic hubs. And this is the global homogenization, I guess, is being contracted into Globo Homo, which is what they're describing. But you can tell the people, they've all got all the same set of interests and set of goals. I mean, diversity matters because they've got people coming from all over the world. So this is a huge consideration, like diversity and inclusion. And then you've got any kind of multinational or supranational projects like the EU or the International Global Compacts on climate or whatever it is. And blah, blah, blah. They're all in favor of this because they want to build a kind of international administrative superstate that will have the power to order these administrative regions that we formerly called nation states into whatever policy the scientists the magical, mystical scientists have decreed for this day. And if that policy changes tomorrow, then the whole thing turns on a dime, and suddenly the messaging is 100% blaring in the opposite direction. I mean, you got this in the coronavirus every goddamn day, it seemed. Wear masks. Don't wear masks. Oh, actually, not wearing masks is bad. Yeah, but wearing masks actually is spreading the coronavirus. Oh my God, I just want to be left alone, man. I just want to grill. Just Jesus Christ. But this is what the sort of meddling, busybody, bureaucrat class wants for the world, and they'll call it something like the Great Reset, and they're getting it. And so, good news for the future, I guess. Good news for Destiny, because this is what he wanted. Bad news for Hassan, I guess.
Next question from Camstib. Camstib would like to know why you think that intersectionalists are the only group of people that care about using correct pronouns. What about people who just want to make sure others feel comfortable?
Then what are they by any other name than intersectionalists? Tell me another philosophy that has a deep thought about a pronoun.
Well, I can't.
Well, neither can I. That's the thing. You know, like I'm happy to be enlightened, but I just can't think of any other philosophy that goes into deep thoughts about the pronouns that society ascribes to a person, because it doesn't seem like any other worldview thinks that sex and gender are different things.
All right, let's see. Comrade Nana asks, what do you think of Boris Johnson as the Prime Minister?
I think he's a marvelous frontman. He is appealing to the British in many ways because of his accent, his education, his foppish and vulnerable nature, and the fact that he's not afraid to make a prat of himself in public and be openly patriotic, which in many ways is considered one and the same. And even if Boris has particular considerations in this way, and I think that on an emotional level he probably does, he has the spine of a jellyfish, and for some reason always turns up after the conflict has been had in the various culture wars, when he should be like Trump and leading the charge. But I don't think he has it in him. I'm amazed. I think the only reason that he's done all right on Brexit is because it would literally mean the end of the Conservative Party, which is something like 185 years old. So that's something I don't think he wants to happen on his watch. And so this is one of those things that I think he wouldn't survive if he didn't do it. But on everything else, I think that he thinks the Conservative Party will just do what it always does and just adopt the Labour position. So the opposition has no real teeth with any of their attacks, and continually snake in a very pragmatic way through the waters of existence. But that's not good for people who actually don't want the Labour agenda to be put into action. And the fact that the Conservative Party, and I've spoken to obviously many people in the Conservative Party, like activists who speak to these politicians. I've spoken to some of the politicians myself, and one of the things I find is that many of them are not very well read and not particularly ideological, which in day-to-day life it sounds great because you don't really want to be talking to diehard zealots every goddamn day, but having a moral purpose behind what you're doing gives you a direction and actually tells you and dictates to you right from wrong. And one of the most annoying goddamn things about the Conservatives is they don't seem to understand right from wrong. I mean, they've only just got the balls to turn around and say, hang on a second, this critical race theory stuff, it looks a bit racist, chaps. Oh, yes, it does. Yes, after you all went through it, and only 40 Conservative MPs objected. So it was very frustrating. It's not that on a personal level I don't like Boris, because I actually do quite like Boris. He's he's done public talks and stuff where he's not talking about politics. He's talking about like rhetoric and things like that. Excellent to listen to because he's very informed, and he's a really entertaining guy to talk to. But he's the front man of a party that is expert in containment, as some of my friends would say. They contain anything that might change things for the better. And at the moment, when the coronavirus handling, I don't even know where to begin. Like, the most frustrating thing in the world is that you actually have Englishmen and women across the country just accepting massive fines for opening their shops, just saying, no, I've got the Magna Carta behind me, I'm not going to do this. And then you get a bunch of, like, I don't know, pro-Globo Homo middle-class lefty prats in the comments going, that's just about the barons. It's like, no, it's not, you morons. Read it. Read clause 39. No free man shall have his property denied. No free man. Not fucking barons. You know, and this was over 800 years ago that this was, that the barons sat down and made the king, you know, sign this at Runnymede. Well, I mean, I'm thinking that we're going to have a Runnymede intervention with Boris, because I cannot stand for the life of me the government having the power to tell you to shut your lawfully owned business. Fuck. It annoys me. It annoys me so much. I really just get wound up about it. And it really is like the traditions of England are personal liberty. Even going back to this, free men must not have their property interfered with. By the 15th century, the king couldn't even send his men into your house without a legal writ in England. 1450 or something like that it was. And it's like, that's mad. That is such a highly advanced development of civil rights. It's the tradition of this country. And like Boris claiming to be a patriot, I'd like to see some of it. I don't want to hear about the EU Remain voting fucking lefty COVID shutdown cucks. I want to hear from a leader at this point, because there can be some firm moral leadership, but there's not.
So of course, you know, Brexit is just around the corner. I think the deadline is January 1st. Is that right?
Well, we've actually already left. We're in the transition period, and the transition period is there for us to be able to find a deal. And if we don't get a deal by whatever the date you said was, I forgot it was, then we leave on World Trade Organization terms.
All right. So
as I understand it,
we do have some Brexit and England-focused questions here.
Sure.
One, let me just see who had written this one. I think it was Tan. Yeah. Tan asks, are you in favor of a hard or soft border with Ireland?
I personally don't think that the United Kingdom should put up a border with Ireland, because terrorist elements in Ireland will see that as a casus belli to start killing people. I don't want to give them a casus belli to start killing people, and so I don't see why we should need to enforce a border. And people say, but my bureaucracy, what about my numbers on my spreadsheets? And to that I say, not my fucking problem.
All right. Another question from Tan. Would you vote in favor of a British Republic? I assume he means their abolishment of the monarchy.
Well, there would be no such thing as a British Republic. There would be an English Republic, because the Scots and the Welsh would doubtless not want to follow us into a republic, because we are the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which came into existence with the union of the crowns of England and Scotland. And so if there is no crown in the United Kingdom to hold the United Kingdom together, then there would be no particular reason to have a single republic across the entire archipelago. I think that an English republic is probably not a bad idea at this point, but it strikes me as being something that I think many English people would find antithetical to the way that they view the nation itself. I think they would still want to continue with a monarchy. And I don't disagree in a way, because like Elizabeth II is a descendant of both Harold Godwinson and William the Conqueror, and so that's 1,000 years of English history that is still intact in this country. And I don't think that I'd want to be the person who'd break it, even though a republic probably would be a good idea. I don't think I'd have the balls to be able to do that. So I'll stick with the constitutional monarchy, I think.
All right. Alex Picard asks, excuse me, I'm sorry. Alex Picard asks, if you were to evaluate the success or failure of Brexit in 5 to 10 years' time, what stats or metrics would you use to do so?
The amount... excuse me. The amount of autonomy that Britain has over its own internal decision-making capacity. That's how I would define Brexit as a success. The leftists, the materialists, will sit there and go, yeah, but what if our GDP is lower? It's like, well, what if it is? You know, the question is about autonomy. The question is about self-determination. That's what's being answered with Brexit. I don't see why we couldn't be economically more prosperous outside of the European Union either. But I'm no economist. But it strikes me that if we're not bound by Europe's regulations, then we could deregulate, de-tax, and encourage massive amounts of investment into this country. It'd be a highly desirable thing, with massive human capital. And if we're going to cut loads of regulations and loads of loads of taxes, then why wouldn't we just be undercutting all of Europe, like the privateers that we are? Like why are we not in the perfect position to actually destroy Europe's economic future? Because it kind of looks like we might be, and you get what you fucking deserve. So at the end of the day, maybe you should have dealt with us equitably rather than treated us like something that was under your thumb. Because that's what this is all about. And the metric for me for success is if we're determining our own future.
All right. Why do you think it's been so difficult to reach a deal?
Because the European Union is intransigent and know that if they don't try and hurt us, then they look weak to their constituencies, who are already in a great deal of fear anyway. And this is definitely going to be seen as an attempt by Britain to hurt the European Union, even though really it's an attempt by Britain merely to govern itself. I don't think that the British people have a general hatred of Europe. Not in any serious way. I mean, there's banter, historic banter, but there's, in the modern context, and the way that people think of modern Europe, people like Europe generally. Even a lot of the Brexiteers still quite like Europe and go on holiday to Europe. It's not anything about the people of Europe or anything like that, but there is a definite kind of governance that comes out of Europe that doubtless originates through some long history that evolves from Roman canon law or something like this, that's particularly different to English common law. And this, I think, gives two different worldviews and makes the project an incompatible mess that Britain is never comfortable being a part of and never has been. And so the European Union essentially has to treat Britain as if it's attacking it by demonstrating alternative that actually may well turn out to be superior. It weakens their position naturally, and Britain's position will be strengthened. And so trying to get us to operate by their framing is the most important thing. And you'll notice that most of the questions have been kind of the most basic ones, actually. Should Britain control the territorial waters around it? Well, everyone on Earth and their grandmother who didn't have an emotional stake in Brexit would just say yes, because every country is entitled to control its own territorial waters. But the French are furious that we're not going to allow them to fish in it, and they want concessions from us for us to have our territorial waters in order to sell them the fish. And it's like, no, you don't understand. These are our waters. We own the waters through international law and through, frankly, the right of the stronger. These are not French waters; they are British waters, and you know that. And you would apply that standard to any other country, but because it's us and because it's now and because it's what's happening right now, you're essentially gambling that we will be stupid enough or weak enough to let you have it. And it's not unfair on our part to say no to this. And you know that. And if if the situation was reversed, we would say that it was not unfair for you to do the same. So I think it is fear and a kind of high-handedness. And there have been a lot of anti-English specifically comments that I could draw upon from various European leaders over the decades in regard to the way that the European project has been managed that I could use to back that up. I won't go into it now.
All right, so I think it was Nietzsche said, "God is dead and we have killed him." It could be said that UKIP is dead, but who killed it?
UKIP has had many, many, many wounds. But the final thing that killed UKIP was the hesitation about walking through the fire, as Andrew Breitbart was saying. The problem that UKIP had is it wanted to be a mainstream party, but obviously it was never accepted by the mainstream. And what it needed to do after literally being burned by the fire is just step through it. And then you're on the other side and none of it matters. And it's really frustrating that Jared Batten was doing exactly that. He was doing exactly the right thing. So for anyone who doesn't know the deep lore on UKIP, UKIP as a party is quite old. It's not that old, but like 25 years old, but old relatively speaking to the current present day where everything moves at a million miles an hour. So it's got this kind of deep institution in it called the NEC. And this is the National Executive Committee. And it's kind of built on the model of the Labour Party, which is kind of frustrating because it allows essentially a group of people to take command of the party and usurp the party from the leader, which then the leader being elected by the body of the party is a strange thing to have. I mean, if you didn't have an electoral system to choose the leader of the party, fine, have some body that can take away power from the ruler. But if you have an elected ruler, why the hell do you need a body to interfere with what he does? You don't. That is bizarre. But anyway, so the NEC ends up unseating Jared Batten. They end up preventing him from running again, and that's really annoying because after the election, which everyone knew Farage was going to storm it, everyone knew Farage is Mr. Brexit, and Donald Trump is not wrong calling him that. Like everyone in Britain associates UKIP with Nigel Farage, and so when he's like, right, I'm in the Brexit party now, okay, well everyone's associates the Brexit party with Nigel Farage because they're voting for Farage, they're voting for the sort of normalcy, and again, very Trumpian, in fact, the kind of British normalcy that Farage was promoting, and the sort of patriotism that he had, the very same brand, but just for the British mould. And so Jared Batten had stepped through the fire. He didn't care what people were going to say. He and UKIP were going to carry on saying and doing the right thing, regardless of how unpopular that was. But the thing is, that's not an unpopular position, right? That's actually just a position in which you are consolidating, because under Batten, UKIP had got up to something like 40,000, 45,000 members, which is large. The Conservative Party only has like 120,000 members, something like that. And so it's getting rather big. And it was growing. It was consistently growing. And then they removed Batten. And then the internal collapse began, where power vacuums emerged and people tried to vote in. But the membership were entirely in favour of Batten's agenda. Like he had, it was something like 70, 75% or something that were really in favour of it. And so when it came to the next elections, you had the successor to Jared Batten, who's a Mr. Richard Brain, a very, very nice chap, very intelligent and, well-read and honest, I think is the best way to put it, chap, when it came to these kind of questions of philosophy and the right thing to do. And he thought that the direction that I guess we'll call the YouTubers, because it wasn't just me, although I won't lie, I was definitely pushing in this direction. But he totally endorsed the direction in which we were heading because he saw it to be the right thing too. We have to be able to talk about these difficult subjects. We have to be able to hold on to these ancient liberties that we have. We have to, have all of these things to be able to be proud of our own country. And when so they have an election for the leader, and out of 4 candidates, he received over 50% of the vote, something like 54%, something like that. And so the other 46% is shared between 3 people. So you can see the upswell where the membership wanted to go. They wanted to take what we're doing online into the real political arena. And that will work. Under Jared Batten, literally he put something like 12,000. He'd been in for a year as an interim leader, and he'd raised the membership by 12,000 after it dropped to below 20. Something like that. But it was a huge increase. I probably messed up the exact number off the top of my head, but this is a while ago now. But the NEC ends up removing him and removing Richard Brain for various reasons. It's a massive drama. It ends up in lawsuits where they're suing Brain for going into his own office or something like this and accessing his own machine, something like that. I didn't follow it exactly, but it was just right, this is a crazy cascade of people who are essentially fighting over the ashes of UKIP, because once they essentially deposed Brain, there was it was weird. It was almost like a mainstream politician had joined UKIP and had taken over. You could hear the kind of false rhetoric coming out of their mouths. And the party membership, as I understand it, is now somewhere around 4,000 or 5,000. Almost everyone left after they got rid of Batten and Brain. And I don't really know what's going on with the party now, but it's languishing. And so there are people on the internet who think it's just me who's been the problem. Live in the UK, I'm a nobody, Like, you might see articles on Twitter or something, but in the real world, that's not what I'm just not influential enough to be able to do that. I wish I was that important. Maybe I would have taken different steps, but I'm just not that important. And except for some people on the internet, of course. But yeah, it was really frustrating though, because UKIP were actually going really well, but people failed to understand what the what was needed, I think.
All right. Next question we've got here. Um, I think you already addressed a bit about why UKIP lost support. There was a question about sorry, Scotland. I don't know why I couldn't remember its name. But of course, as I remember, the Scottish weren't too fond of Brexit, and there's been some talk about a second referendum. What are your thoughts on another referendum
Well, Brexit.
on Scottish independence?
Oh, well, I mean, more people voted in Scotland for Brexit than voted for the SNP. So if that's anything to go by, Brexit isn't like it's not so terribly unpopular in Scotland. The question really is about Scottish nationalism, and to be honest with you, I'm at the point where I kind of want them to get it. I kind of want them to have it. I mean, back in 2014, I didn't take a particularly partisan position on it. I just made a video that was about the history of how Scotland came to be in a union with England anyway, because it's easy if you're a junior partner. It looks like if you're smaller than one of the major partners, like in the Soviet Union, everyone was subordinate to Russia, and in some ways you could say that that is true about Scotland with England, but in other ways it's really not. And the Scots really benefited from the union with England in lots of major ways. It gave them access to world empire and stuff like this, and it also raised the quality of their law system. I think there are like innovations that English common law had that Scots law did not have, and we essentially imposed on them, like abolishing torture. And so when the English came around to abolishing slavery, a lot of Scottish slave owners ended up getting big payouts for the for the slaves we had to buy from them. But nobody really wants to talk about that, I guess. But yeah, I personally, I kind of want them to have it because I've heard from, say, SNP MP Ian Blackford. I've heard him say with my own ears on the floor of Parliament that Scotland is a net contributor to the United Kingdom. This is just not fucking true. And I want this clear level of delusion to be played out. I want the SNP to get what they want. It won't be good for the Scots, but I want the Scots to understand that the SNP are cancer. They're way worse. They're the European socialist model of politics. And you can have that, or you can have an English liberal, decentralized, and open system. And by the end of it, you'll be begging for the English to come back. Like, if you think it's bad now, like every time Boris Johnson announced some sort of lockdown measure, Sturgeon comes out and goes, yeah, well, we're going to do one that's worse. It's like, oh, thanks. Good. That's brilliant. So yeah, like let them have it. It's going to be shit. So.
Yeah, it's kind of odd to think about it. The way you phrase it reminds me of a lot of people in India. I don't know what it is. I'm always surprised by it, but there's so many Indian men that I've met who say they wish the British would come back.
Oh yeah. Oh, I don't doubt. There's one great contribution to political history is good governance. That's it. And it's been a long tradition, and it's been a long time coming. And many wars have been fought over it. We fought a civil war over it. Should the king have absolute power? And the side that said no won, and that's important. It doesn't often happen. Usually, you end up just getting a full-on revolution and beheadings. But anyway, yeah, I don't know why what is essentially going to be a one-party state is going to emerge, and the Scots are just going to be like, okay, this was not a good idea. Okay, lad.
All right, so guys, if you want to write questions, write them in Sargon AMA. We'll get to some of the other areas, but I'm just trying to get through the Brexit questions right now. Jock writes that it was a pleasure to meet you and be in your Bridgewater video when you did your UKIP tour. How
Well,
was
thank
the
you.
experience overall, and would you do anything different a second time around if given the chance?
Overall, I had an amazing time. The whole thing was just such an exciting period of my life. Um, I made lots of really good friends. I essentially got a lot of the. I've started a website called loadseats.com, and I've employed a bunch of people who essentially just volunteered to be a part of my campaign to help me run it, and they're doing a great job. And the reason that I hired these people is because I know how hard they work. They know they obviously approve of the things I'm doing, and they work really really hard, and so they're great people to be able to, give them a job that they like, and they seem to be enjoying the job, so that's great. So it's really nice to have been able to build something. And if it wasn't for the MEP campaign, this all wouldn't have been able to come about. So, but the experience of it was a roller coaster. You never knew what you were going to get. Like in some towns, we got amazing receptions. Like Plymouth, in the middle of the day, man, we had, I don't know, like 300 or 400 people turn up in like 1 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, and it wasn't a holiday or anything. So like, but even then, it was a party. It was like a big live event. This was pre-COVID, so life was fun, and we waltzed in, and we just and you get the occasional like progressive type who would be like, "No, I hate you." Would be like, "Okay, come and explain it." And I had some great conversations with some very interesting people. And then in other towns, you'd be mobbed by hundreds of lefties who'd be yelling about fascism. It's like, oh God, shut up, you morons. So yeah, the whole thing, but every day you got up and there was real energy. We didn't know what was going to encounter. And then Milo came over and that was fantastic. And then going to Gibraltar was amazing. Again, like these incredible experiences. Like, I've never been to Gibraltar before. It was lovely. I absolutely adore it. And yeah, so yeah, I really enjoyed it. If I were going to do something different, I probably wouldn't have made a second joke about Jess Phillips because that did get my channel demonetized. Looking back, maybe I should have listened to Callum when he said you probably shouldn't do that. I insisted, no, fuck them. Probably should. Probably should listen to Callum in future.
Uh, all right. So, next question we have here is from Gellarino. What are your thoughts on CANZUK, a travel agreement between Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK?
I think it's going to become inevitable, given the way that China is acting. I don't see how we can consider the world a safe, free, or equitable place if we do not form some kind of coalition against the Communist Party of China. So, and there's no more natural place for us to go than people who sprung from our traditions, sprung from the same common law, the same traditions of liberty, the same philosophy of governance, the same way that society is run in the sort of like 2.4 kid nuclear family, or at least traditionally that's what it was. The same sort of Protestant work ethic, the same value set. That it just doesn't make sense that we wouldn't automatically be on the same side. And let's be honest, I mean, like, if Australia got invaded by China, then surely the English-speaking world would be forced to come to Australia's defence. And if it didn't, I would be on here every day raging about it. We must liberate Australia. They're under Chinese communist tyranny. Let's liberate Australia. I'd be demanding it, man. But I would be amazed if I needed to do that. That should be gone without saying. They're people who agree with us on a fundamental level. So what we're talking about really is the sort of right ordering of the world. How should the world be ordered from the British perspective? And the Australians have basically got it right. They're just reverting to their roots as a prison colony at the moment. But we can change the minds of those people, I think.
Lil Bill wants to know, what are your thoughts on Cyberpunk?
I haven't really been following the drama with Cyberpunk 2077. I'm a big fan of Cyberpunk 2021. I've got like the original rulebook. It's missing the front cover now because it's very, very old. Back at my house, back at my parents' house. It's been there like 30 or 20 years or something. But I haven't been following the new drama. I don't really see how it's transphobic. I looked into the allegations because I always love mocking these things, and I couldn't even see what they were trying to say about being transphobic. I mean, Cyberpunk, the whole appeal of it was that it was bizarro norm bending in every regard, and it was never. I mean, it was just an intrinsic part of Cyberpunk that gender was not something you couldn't play with. You know, it couldn't be modified, and that was something interesting about it. And so, I don't really see. You know, of all the franchises to attack, Cyberpunk's the worst one. You know, for people like The Witcher makes more sense to attack as being transphobic. like why Cyberpunk?
I'm trying to remember. There was an ad in it that people said was transphobic.
Yeah,
I
it was
think.
something about an advertisement where I don't know. It was a person, a transgender person being sexualized or something.
Yeah,
I'm like,
I remember like discussing with people while I was playing it. I think I was actually in the elevator and saw that ad as we were discussing it. It's a transgender person, you know, kind of sexualized, and I think the text is try something different or something like that.
but what's wrong with that? How's that bad? Like, I don't see like if it's going to be transphobic, then what you're essentially saying is against the interests of trans people, and it's not against someone's interest to be portrayed as being appealing. like here's something novel and interesting. Oh, really? People hate novel and interesting things. There's nothing bad about the way that's framed. You morons! And it's just being framed as, you know, it's an advert. It's a sexualized trans person. What's wrong with that? That's normal. Like that's we sexualize all kinds of people. Surely you want trans people to be sexualized. Portraying them in a positive light is a good thing. So what the hell's your problem? Like, anyway, I'm sure there's some incredibly detailed academic view on how this is actually transphobia.
Well, I think the objection people had is roughly just that the way the ad's framed, it um, treats trans people as not being their preferred identity, if that makes sense.
Treats trans people as not being their preferred identity. What, the person listening or watching the advert?
Right. So someone that is a trans
Wow.
female, you know, the ad treats it rather than being as a female as, you know, I'm sorry, rather than treating them as a female, the ad treats it. I'm sorry, I should not be saying it. The
Yeah.
ad treats them as a trans female, specifically, if that makes sense. I
But I
think
mean, they
that's the main
are a
objection.
trans female specifically. That's the thing, isn't it? I don't know, and I don't think they know. To be honest, I think that any controversy this fine that they're ginning up is just grifting. I doubt Cyberpunk did anything wrong here,
Uh,
even from their own standards, frankly.
uh, so next question we have here, I like this one. This can be spicy. From Astro2998, was British imperialism a good thing?
Depends who you're talking from the perspective of, doesn't it? Good essentially just means within one's own interests. Is it good for you? Does it advance your interests? And so, from the perspective of whoever's speaking, good is subjective. So, I mean, if you are the Mongol Empire of India, no, that's not good for you because you're going to get deposed. But that's what happened with the Mughals, and I mean, is India better or worse for it? I don't see why we would treat the Mughals as some sort of sacred entity. Oh, they weren't indigenous to India. They weren't not conquerors. They weren't ruling through the will of the people. They didn't believe in any of this democratic nonsense that we care about, rights and liberty and all this sort of stuff. If you happen to like liberty and you think that human rights are a good thing, then maybe prohibiting Indian traditions where, like, if a husband dies, his wife has to die with him, maybe that's good for human rights. It's not good for Mughal traditionalism, maybe, but, like, sorry, I guess I disagree with Mughal traditionalism. Again, with the caste system and all this sort of stuff, like, I like if I think that the British view on that is better, as in we shouldn't have a caste system, even though we kind of do. But at least we accept that it's not a morally upstanding thing to have. And I mean, I lived with an Indian guy once in a shared house, and he told me about how he bumped into someone from a higher caste or caste or how it was pronounced from him and in England, and he told him that he was going to do his laundry and dishes for him because he was this high caste. This guy was like, no, we're not in India, I don't have to do that. And I'm just thinking, mate, in India you shouldn't have to do that. You know, it's not just. But anyway, I guess if you oppose the British Empire, then you oppose the abolition of the caste system, or the what would be an attempt at that, I suppose. I don't know. It depends on what your values are. I personally think the British Empire was a net positive, especially when compared with, compared to what? Well, communist imperialism seems to have been pretty awful. Nazi imperialism seems to have been pretty awful. But British imperialism produced the highest quality countries in the world. The countries that everyone else in the world is desperately trying to get into. So what did the British get right? And of course the answer is good governance. Limited government, anyway, and property rights as well. Almost a kind of autistic obsession with property rights, but there's a reason for it. It stops shit getting smashed up.
All right. Tan asks, what, in your opinion, is the greatest threat to the United Kingdom?
The United Kingdom, probably. I don't know. I don't know what the greatest threat is. I don't know what threats we're currently under. I mean, I don't think China's actually going to invade us anytime soon. I just think they may end up impoverishing and crippling us. Like, I think China will see what America has done with control of financial systems and control of key positions, and then take a relatively kind of hands-off view of their empire. Presumably, they're not interested in imposing Chinese mores on Africa, but they are going to be extracting vast amounts of wealth and presumably mistreating locals in the acquisition of these materials. So I don't know. I don't think that's. I mean, that only works if we allow it to work. We don't have to allow it to work, but I don't see us taking any steps to prevent it. I mean, we almost sold our 5G infrastructure to Huawei. So what are you doing? Why would you do this? Like, and we know why, because as a Chinese professor from the University of Beijing, who was chosen exclusively by Xi Jinping to go and get someone to rent him a bookstore when he went on a book tour in Washington, D.C., he said that, well, we can persuade people with one stack of money, and if they don't accept one stack of money, we give them two stacks of money. And that's undoubtedly why the Conservatives were going to choose Huawei for our goddamn infrastructure. Of all the companies on Earth, they're the ones who are going to be most open to be bribing people, I think. And so, anyway, as long as we don't just allow the Chinese to con our fucking politicians, we should be fine. I don't think the Britain's under any tremendous existential threat at the moment, but maybe I'm just not seeing something that's happening everywhere else.
All right. Next question. I figure I'd like to get into a few of the internet dramas here. But to start with,
if you want, I haven't really followed any for a while, so I doubt my input's going to be very useful. But I'm happy to.
Well, for starters here, Mr. Tom wants to know, disagreements aside, which Breadtuber do you admire the most?
Huh. There are some smaller ones that I actually quite like. I quite like them as people, and I quite like their content, even if I disagree with their axioms, because they are, in other respects, honest. I think all of the large ones, I don't like using the term grifter, but there is very definitely a strong grift in many of them. A lot of it is clearly about money and clicks rather than addressing issues. And you can't. The most clear example of this is Vaush talking about Muslim grooming gangs in the UK. He just doesn't know what he's talking about. But he has assumed that since the right wing are talking about this thing must not exist or not be bad. And so he has, as a leftist, the responsibility, the duty to defend Muslim grooming gangs. And it's a pretty indefensible position. The evidence is actually unbelievably manifest. It's embarrassing how transparently uninformative the Conservatives' latest report about this is. I don't think it's Sajid Javid's report, and it leaves out some key areas and doesn't even mention Islam, despite the fact that many of the victims have told us, just look, when we were being abused, they would cite the Quran at us. And it was the Rochdale ones. When they were convicted, they started yelling Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and yet no mention of religion at all. And Vaush will try and prop up the mainstream narrative on this, but the mainstream narrative on this in Britain is just wrong and has been debunked, which is why they've produced this new report, which, if you take the time to read, you can see is just nothing. They literally say we just don't have the data. Like they try and persuade people that it's something like of data that consists of knowledge of about 30% of the cases. And so they're like, oh, well, in these 30% of the cases, we found that 30% of them were done by white men and 28% were done by Pakistani men, which wasn't the question. It was by Muslims. This is the question, but by Pakistani men, and therefore. But then you realize, well, hang on, Pakistani men are like 2% of the population. But the Guardian still runs with the headline, white men are most of the groomers. It's like, that's not true. You can't say that. I mean, and the Independent replied to this in quite a snarky way. The Independent, being a left-wing newspaper, replied to this with pictures of the groomers. And you can tell by the collages of people who have been arrested and convicted for grooming that in this particular category, it is not mostly white men. And this is an indefensible narrative, and this is what Vaush has tried to defend. And it's like with the Kyle Rittenhouse thing. Like the fact that the facts on the ground just are so counter to reality that when they feel forced to defend these, you know that what they're doing is committing to an orthodoxy, like an extremist, rather than engaging with the competing moral claims about the facts on the ground. And so that is essentially a grift. They know that that's not really true, and there's no way that if a mob of people were trying to beat Vaush to death, and Vaush had a machine gun, he'd stop at like 5 going, well, hang on a second, guys, I don't want to kill all of you. Feel free to take your mob justice out on me. He wouldn't do that. And so this is definitely a grift. And people like that I do not respect. But there are smaller left-wing YouTubers and Twitter users who are not like that. And they do accept that, yes, okay, these things are true, and I don't have a good answer for those, is essentially the thing they come to. And, you know, not everyone's got a good answer for everything. And that doesn't mean that the entire philosophy is invalid. That doesn't mean that something that is a bit of an Achilles heel negates the true claims that the philosophy is making. What it means is that that philosophy doesn't have answers for these things. And that's fine, as long as you're not a zealot. You know, if you can engage in political toleration, then when another worldview comes along and says, look, we have a moral claim here and we want you to accept it, if you deny it, then you look like an idiot, because generally everyone has some kind of valid moral claim. The problem is what they want to do in order to solve it or make good on it. And there are lots and lots of people who don't want to make good on their moral claims. And there are some that we don't recognize the moral claims of. You know, the jihadis will come along and say, well, you're bad for not being under Islam. It's like, sorry, we don't recognize that moral claim. We don't recognize what you're saying here. You're wrong, and if you're going to try and kill people, we will take action. But anyway, so those left-wing YouTubers who are not raving zealots and just habitually take the most extreme position on any issue to appease the dopamine-addicted super chatters, they are the sort of lefty breadtubers I like. Incidentally, this actually means ContraPoints is more high up on the list than she should be, otherwise, because she has, in her time, stirred the hornet's nest somewhat, and I can respect that.
All right. So Vaush has, well, it's an old one, but he has a video out titled "Debating Sargon of Akkad and Exposing Him as a White Nationalist." So that's obviously clickbait, but
Yes.
a lot of breadtubers call you a white nationalist. Why is that?
Because they are communists.
I'm sorry, I don't follow.
Yeah. They are communists. And so they don't recognize any ethnic group's claim to an area. So from the perspective of BreadTube, it's hard to understand why they support the Kurds, except until you realize the Kurds are actually, what they're talking about is factions of communists within Kurdish ranks. But when you have a sort of Kurdish moral claim to a nation state, they can't really accept that, even though everyone accepts that for everyone else. Like, I agree that the French have got a claim to France. Like, where do the French properly belong? The French properly belong in France. Now, I'm not making a judgment or characterization of the nature of what it is to be a Frenchman there. I don't think that every Englishman is white, and I don't think that every white person is an Englishman. And so to call me a white nationalist would suggest that I'm somehow in league with the French and Germans, that I somehow recognize them as one of my own, and I would be happy if millions of Germans were moving over, or like, millions of French or something, which is obviously not the case. And I also don't think that every English person is white. Like, my dad is English, but he is not white, because he is the product of mixed race. And notice that I'm not using the term race when I characterize. I'm using a national group. I'm using a national identity, and an ethnic identity, not a racial classification, because I'm not speaking through the lens of science. I don't care about someone's DNA. I'm not interested in their biological makeup. None of that matters. Why the hell would I care about that? But what I do care are the kind of values and cultures that are packaged together in ethnic identities. And this is what most of the world is like. In the United States, though, you have a different worldview. You have a revolutionary worldview that is built on individualism. And so the idea of there being an American ethnic group, which there is something that these sort of left-wingers, and this was probably always an inevitability. You can see the roots of this in Thomas Paine and his desire for a kind of encompassing of mankind through the American Revolution. You can see this through Thomas Paine, but and in the Breadtubers now. But this is just not the philosophy of most of the world. If we recognize that a people exist, and we recognize that a people have a claim to a homeland, as in the place where they have arrived in the modern world from, then that to the communist is what they're calling white nationalism. But that to a non-communist is called Westphalian politics. That's just what the Peace of Westphalia established. We agreed that, in fact, every people has a right to autonomy and to their own homeland, and this is the way that the UN runs now. So they think the UN is essentially a white nationalist project, and it's like, I don't even know where to begin. There's nothing to do with race. It's just nothing to do with race. Like, none of this is to do with race at all. And yet, Vaush doesn't seem to understand any of this. And so he has essentially mischaracterized absolutely everything I believe, because frankly, I don't think he's that smart.
So, should England be for the Anglo-Saxons, and should the Normans go home?
Well, the Anglo-Saxons don't exist. There's no such thing as an Anglo-Saxon anymore. The Anglo-Saxons, the Normans, the Jutes, the Danes who invaded, and countless other small things that happened have, through the confluence of like 1,500 years of history, produced a unique culture to the British Isles called English. And that doesn't come from anywhere else, and it doesn't belong anywhere else. Where else would you say that the English belong? I mean, it sounds like an imperial mindset when you say, well, actually, that what right do the Bangladeshis have to Bangladesh? How dare you say that this should be ethnically exclusive? You racist! You're a white supremacist! You're against our imperialism! I wouldn't have the gall to make moral claims on Bangladesh. In fact, the moral claim of the Bangladeshis to Bangladesh is why I think imperialism was wrong in the first place. I don't think we should be out conquering the world, or at least not if it's a question of morals. What would I like to happen to myself? Would I decree it for others? No, of course not. But none of this is about race. None of this is talking about the categories that the communists care about. I don't care about race.
So, is it just cultural? Like, if someone isn't English by birth, but they're, let's make it the most controversial option possible. A Frenchman, learns English and wants to move to England and live as an Englishman. Is that fine?
Yeah, I don't see why not. That's what my grandfather did. And I don't see a problem with that at all. But it's not really about any abstract ideals. Like, it's about the respect that the people who live in the country have for the country itself at large. And so it's about the way that they think of themselves. Like, how to describe it? It's about the people, the individual real people, right? And them having their own families and houses and friend groups and networks, and the composite of this is the country. And so understanding that you have consideration for the people of this area, this country, you understand that this is a very complex system of people just living their lives and trying to do their best. And abstracting away from that allows you to create these stupid categories that are essentially meaningless because they don't map to reality very, very well. And so, like, what do the people on the ground think? And if you've got, you know, like most of them, like 80% of them saying, well, we're English, these are our traditions, these are our customs, these are our heritage, we can connect all of this together. Like, if you came to England, even if you didn't want to become English yourself, you would still respect that thing. I mean, I've never said that non-English people can't live in England. That would be ridiculous. What a ridiculous statement that would be, you know. And so it's weird, like saying a white national. I would have to be suggesting that non-white people could live in England, but I would then be allowing as many French and Germans to live in England as the progressive wanted, I guess, because again, I'm just not using their framing. I'm not using the terminology, and so I guess the sort of brainlet breadtubers can't really understand that.
All right, I just want to note this seems to be one of the most controversial answers you've given. A few Englishmen are really mad in chat, saying a Frenchman can never be English.
Well, I mean, genetically, sure, but what is it? You know, what is an Englishman? I think that I've got my definition, and it requires certain things, but does it have to be by birth? I mean, we've got plenty of people who are genetically English who are calling themselves proud Europeans. So I don't think you can sit there and say, oh, it's got to be about genes or anything like that. I think that's nonsense. I think it's a total red herring. I think it's about a respect for the country and the people in the country that make up the country and the heritage that they're continuing. And I don't see why a Frenchman who happened to be a massive Anglophile couldn't move to England, learn English, and do his part to uphold our institutions and our customs. I don't see what would prevent that. And I don't see why that would be a problem. I don't think these people would be disruptive or, you know, ungrateful or anything like that. And I've got the example of my own grandfather in mind when I think of this. And so I don't agree that, like, we need any kind of racial discussion when it comes to cultures, because most people just self-associate anyway. Most people choose to associate with people who think and act like themselves. And so I would rather hang out with, you know, I can't think of a French name, Jacques the Frenchman, the Anglophile Frenchman, as he talks about football or something, than I would hang out with, you know, Robert Smith, the blue-head progressive who wants to lecture me about Marx. Like, who do I like out of that? Who do I want to spend the time around? Who would I want to include in my little part of England that is the social groups and the overlapping spheres that I live in? You know, who would I rather associate with? I don't really want to associate with Mr. Smith, the pink-haired lunatic, you know, but Jacques, who wants to sit there and, you know, talk about Henry V or something, I'd be like, yeah, okay, let's do it. That sounds like fun. That sounds like a good time, you know? So, you know, I don't know, like, I don't see a problem. You know, but obviously they can't sit there and go, well, we're proud Frenchmen. And, you know, now we've taken over, you know, like the majority of, like, Bradford is French. You know, so now Bradford's a French town. We're going to fly the tricolour and put up a statue of Napoleon. Yeah, I'd be just as angry about that. And the progressive would have to call that white supremacy as well, which would be stupid again. But, you know, what are you going to do? It's a bloody stupid way of looking at the world.
All right, next question comes from Lavi. Lavi wants to know, what do you think about Black Lives Matter?
I think it's a communist revolution in race war clothing. And I don't support it. And I think anyone who does support it is probably a well-meaning idiot, a well-meaning fool. And that's not to say that black people don't have problems. They do. But I don't think Black Lives Matter is the mode to solving those problems. I think Black Lives Matter is essentially a kind of vendetta that's being engaged against the historical oppressors of black people, which is why they hate white people so much.
Alex Picard asks, are there any valuable ideas from the left side of the spectrum, and if so, what are they? Oh shit.
I'm just thinking, what innovations, what intellectual innovations have the left given us that were actually of any use? Because everything good and useful would be considered right wing now, even though in its day it was very progressive. I think the main problem, the main place that the left falls down is in their fundamental conception of rights, and from this, all of their mistakes stem, and that means that there can really be no kind of agreement with left-wing style politics, because it ends constantly in a stupid place with stupid claims about stupid things. And I think you can trace it, the sort of germination of this, to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, as compared to the Declaration of Independence, which the French were tremendously impressed with the Declaration of Independence, which was written by Englishmen who were concerned about the English way of life and their historic liberties under the English Constitution, citing the Magna Carta and things like this. And in that, they just rip off John Locke, which is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what that doesn't do is guarantee you anything. The government is not going to interfere with your life, your liberty, or your happiness. And okay, that's fine. You know, it's not that the rights come from the state; it's that the rights are inherent. They come from your creator. But the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen includes property as a right, and that isn't a right. That's just not what a right is. If your rights are intrinsic, property is not one of those things. You know, ownership of property outside of your person is not something that can be guaranteed by the state, unless, of course, you are a socialist, in which all property is owned by the state and therefore can be allocated to you as a citizen. And I think it's from this perspective, this introduction of of something that's outside of the person, that destroys continental liberalism and ends up opening the doorway to communism and therefore fascism. The idea that the state gives you rights. This is something the left is swimming in, and it's disgusting. The idea that without the state you have no rights, you have nothing intrinsic about you that is yours. Why even defend yourself from wild animals if you have no rights? Why would primitive man even... Because he did have rights. He has a right to defense. He has a right to his own body. He has a right to maintain it in the face of threats. You know, because the right is within him himself. And if you think that that's not there, then you don't have a justification for fighting against our tyrannical government. You don't have a justification for owning your own property. We're going to tell you about how to do everything about yourself because we are the ones who dictate your rights. And suddenly you sound like a fucking fascist, don't you? It's not surprising that all of these things came out of the French Revolution. It's a contiguous series of events. It's all connected. And they're not different, they're not separate, they're all one and the same, and they spring from the same corrupted seed. And it's the introduction of property into the French Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. That's what I think.
So something I'm really curious about, because the word's been tossed around a bit, both by yourself and people critical of you. What is a fascist? What is fascism?
Fascism is total domination of the society by the state, using essentially the state as a model for God. Because you can read in just the doctrine of fascism the way they conceive of it. I mean, they coined the term totalitarian. The socialists just lived it before the fascists came about. They just lived totalitarianism. But the fascists were the ones who were totally honest about it. Because if you say, well, look, the rights aren't inherent, the rights actually come from the state, and therefore it's okay for the state to take all of your property and allocate to you what it believes is right for you to have, then you've turned the state into God. God was the source of human rights. And the great thing about God being the source of human rights is that he isn't going to come down and announce himself. You know, it's you know, if you don't believe in God and you think, well, he's a fairy tale being, well, that's brilliant, because you'll never receive a fucking commandment from this fairy tale being beyond what you already have. And so if if therefore the aspect and the interpretation of God is within ourselves, then we come to the individualist perspective where the rights are yours. The fruit of your labor is yours. You have the moral claim as an agent. You, the individual, have that moral claim. Fascism just accepts the logical premise that socialism sets up, which is that rights are created by the state, and therefore the state must be God. I mean, look at it. It is all-powerful. If it can create rights, anything that can create rights is all-powerful, because that's what God could do. And, of course, the state exists through time and space. And literally the way they describe it, the state is an organism that extends through time and space and produces all of the people in society. You all grow up under the auspices of this godlike state. And so you, as an individual, are a product of this godlike state. After all, you existed in this society. You sprung up out of the ground under it. And therefore, it has complete claim to you, your thoughts, your person. This is the thing. Like, Hitler wasn't not a socialist. He was just like, why would I bother with property when I could control the minds of the individuals themselves? And he literally says this. So it's like, the way of thinking about the world is just wrong. The idea that the rights come from the state gives the state the authority of God. And I don't think, that's totally antithetical to the course of the English-speaking world, where the whole point was to restrain the state, make it something that is actually under a cage. That's what a constitution is, a cage around the state, to put the state as being the servant of society, put it on a leash, get it yapping at the right other dogs on the international block, but otherwise it's not going to be your problem. But instead, it's the total reverse. That is what fascism is. And that's what the socialists are demanding, whether they understand it or not, when they say, oh, well, no one should be able to own property. It's like, why? Just why? If I go out into the woods and I build a house, oh, I've got some property. Oh, God, you better take this off of me or I might be oppressing someone. It's like, it's such a backwards way of thinking about things. But that's where the left goes completely wrong, and they can't understand their own worldview. And there are just going to be loads of leftists knee-jerking reaction to this. But ask yourself, where do rights come from? You don't think they're innate because you think property is something that can be guaranteed to people. States, like, positive rights do not exist. End of story. Every positive right is an entitlement, and if you can't accept that, you're a liar. You're lying to yourself.
Oh, right.
I look forward to the comments on this.
Next question comes from Sam.
Yep.
Sam wants to know, do you believe multiculturalism benefits society?
I suppose the question is, how are you defining multiculturalism? Because multiculturalism in most exchanges where I've seen it used really means multiracialism. And yeah, I think multiracial societies can do just fine. But the problem with multiculturalism is what you are doing is putting bureaucrats between two different groups of people, and you are saying to the bureaucrats are saying to each group, there is a line here that you must never cross. For example, there was someone who got in trouble recently with like Pink News or something for culturally appropriating a South Korean dish that they had made and posted on Instagram. It's like, okay, so the bureaucratic class is now going to have to get involved in a dispute between the South Korean community and the American community because someone cooked some food. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what is this? This is nonsense. Like, what you've done is set up an armed camp that is sensitive to infractions, and the infractions are baffling. Most people throughout all human history would be very glad if their culture was being featured in other cultures. Like, cultural influence is a tremendously powerful thing. And this is one of the things that gives France its arrogance and pride, is that French culture, no matter what you think of it, was very, very influential and very desirable to those people who are outside it, because it held a very high opinion of itself. And in some ways, this was justified. And it was something that was a constant upward push, at least in some ways. And like the idea of not wanting your culture to spread is a method of keeping this culture weak. It's a way of keeping it isolated and divided and hostile to its neighbors, because cultural exchanges are the most normal and natural things in the world. And it's from these cultural exchanges you actually find some of the most interesting things occurring, because you've got two different paradigms that intersect on a particular topic, and you get an unexpected answer because you're in a particular, you think along a series of axioms, and then a foreign series of axioms intersect, and then you find out, oh, what's interesting. It explodes. You get a prism effect. You know, so all these other options become available that you didn't think of before, you couldn't have thought of before, because you didn't have the worldview of the people coming in. And so that's where interesting cultural progress is made. And the progressives are in the middle of restraining that, wheeling it in, and making sure that the inferior groups, the ones in minority positions, feel like victims when they're engaged with by the majority group. And it's like, that's the opposite. That's not how it works. You should feel like victims when you're told you can't do that. You know, when you're segregated from the majority group, then you should be feeling like a victim, because that's literally you being unable to advance, like, your own, as an individual, your own individual interests in this wider society, because you have been segregated out, marked off as something strange and different, and you have special rules applied to you. This was normally bad. You know, in history, this is a bad thing. You don't want that to be the case. You want to just be accepted as normal and be allowed to freely exchange your cultural sort of expressions with other people in society, and not have that policed by a bunch of goddamn bureaucrats. Like, why would you want that? It's such an innovating thing. And yet this is where we are with what is currently multiculturalism. It's very, the idea of culture and race being directly tied together is exactly aligns in that regard, which is exactly the same as the actual white nationalists. They think exactly the same. But I don't think culture and race are synonyms, and so I don't agree with the way that multiculturalism is at the moment.
Kind of reminds me of that thing. Have you seen that bit about woke people and race disagreeing with each
Exactly. Exactly. That was. I've made this point many times. That was a parody that was ripe to be made for years now, and I'm glad someone did it, because it's so true. Because they do view the world in the same way. They look at it through the lens of race, but I'm just not bothered about race.
All right, so for everyone listening in, we're almost at the 90-minute mark. We still
Yeah, I
have,
better head off.
I think, about 100 questions. So if you have a few more, write them in.
I'll try and blast through a few quickly if you want.
Sure. Uh, I asks, it's not me, the username is I. Do you think Donald Trump is a traitor?
No. No.
Oh,
Donald Trump is America's #1 fan. Why? He's. I assume you mean a traitor to America, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, like, he's in America's #1 fan, and he is the president of America. There is nobody whom he could be a traitor to. If he lived in Russia and, you know, was asked by Putin, is he a traitor to Putin? Well, maybe. He's probably a loyalist to America, but as he's the president of the United States, no, I don't think he's a traitor. This is a silly question.
All right. Next one is about recent exchanges, or not exchange, rather, something Shuan had said. I guess during one of her videos, she said something to the effect of, it's clear Sargon hated SJWs for different reasons. I hated them because they were annoying and bad for optics. He hated them because he thought they were destroying Western civilization or something. What are your thoughts on Shuan Head and those comments?
They are destroying Western civilization, and if she says that they're bad for optics, that kind of implies that she's trying to destroy Western civilization too, and is annoyed that these people are making her look bad doing it, which is weird flex, I have to say. I don't know what the wider context is, but that's the implication that I take out of that. But yeah, I don't like the SJWs because they're communists, and I'm a liberal. And liberalism is built on property rights. The very foundation of it is predicated on the idea of property rights. So no liberal who believes in liberal ideas, genuine liberal ideas like self-ownership, could ever agree with a communist on the most basic one, which is that nobody should own anything. So, yeah.
All right. Mr. Super Guy asks, what are your thoughts on decriminalization of sex work?
Yeah, I don't think it should be a crime.
All right. Dick wants to know, what would you consider to be your ideal society, and is it achievable?
I don't know whether it's achievable, but I do know that service guarantees citizenship.
Sorry, did you say service guarantees citizenship?
Yep.
Let's see. Peace, Anger, and Solitude asks, what are your thoughts on anarcho-communism?
The same as Peter Kropotkin's thoughts. It's utopian nonsense that will never happen.
Tan asks, are you a Santa denier?
No, I'm a dad. I'm a Santa enforcer. My son's currently in trouble because he's on Santa's naughty list right now. Because I've just had another baby, and you hear, oh, they get jealous and they act up, and I think that is true. He doesn't exhibit overt jealousy, but he's definitely acting up, and I try to give him as much time as I can. Obviously, I don't want him to feel left out or anything like that, and so I spend a lot of time with him, but he's still acting up. And it's like, okay, it's noticeable as well.
All right. Addo asks, how did you come across the decision to take on the pseudonym of Sargon of Akkad?
Absolutely no good reason. It was just a historical figure I enjoyed and a name I liked, and I used it as a gamer tag on Steam, and before Steam, just when I was playing video games with my mates. And it was in the early days of the internet, like the late 90s, early 2000s. It was weird to use your name on the internet, because you didn't know who was getting it. The internet wasn't necessarily a safe place, and you would rather have your real identity kept secret because you just didn't know. And as don't get me wrong, the corporatization of the internet, one of the benefits that's come with it is security, and that is a genuine benefit. But I mean, I wasn't particularly bothered about it. I was happy to use the pseudonym, and so I just used that on basically everything I did. And so that was it, and that's the reason it came about. And I just kind of wish I'd used my own name, to be honest.
Let's see. Mr. Super Guy asks, what are your thoughts on systemic racism, specifically of black people in the US and UK?
There is absolutely no systemic racism towards black people in the UK. You can't demonstrate any, and anything that you point out can be otherwise explained by the behavior of the community that you're pointing at. And I believe that the same is probably true in the United States to a larger degree than not. There's doubtless going to be some racists, but I don't think that makes it systemically racist. Race actually doesn't factor in much to American law anymore, as far as I'm aware. In fact, they seem to have provisions against racial discrimination now. So really and again, this comes from being a common law system. You have a system that actually reacts to your behavior, right? The common law system is all about behavior. And so the things you do dictate the reaction you get from the state. And if you do things that are violent, if you do things that are otherwise antisocial or whatever it is, then you end up with a position where the state has to take action disproportionately against this particular community. Now, in Britain, this isn't necessarily the black community. I mean, if you go back 50 years, you'll find all sorts of white ghettos, working class ghettos, in which very similar conditions to what happens in many black communities in America now are occurring. And in fact, in London as well, with all the stabbings we've been having. What it is about broken homes and poor ethical values that have been transmitted. And young men needing father figures, and without father figures, looking for them and replacing them with gang members, because they're the only ones with power and money, notably status and influence in these communities. And that's terrible. It's a destructive sort of downward spiral these communities find themselves in. And yet the law still has to apply to them the same it applies to everyone else. And so these communities feel like they're being personally targeted and victimized. But they're doing things that are unacceptable. Like the amount of shootings you hear about in Chicago. You think, Christ, that just has to end. That has to end. That's what the law is for, is to prevent that kind of scenario. And if it was a working class community in England, no one would care. If the law was cracking down on all these people shooting, they'd be like, "Oh, good." Any of them with a gun, they shouldn't have a gun, ban them, whatever. Lock them up. That would be fine, and no one would claim it was unfair and that they were being targeted and victimized. But because it's in the American context, and because there's a racial divide here, because we've allowed our public discourse to be racially polarized by left wingers, all they can talk about is race and racism now. It's like, but that's just not the problem. No one's saying it's inevitable that black people behave like this. No one's saying that. No one's saying all black people behave like this. No one's saying that it's like even the majority of black people who are behaving like this. But at the end of the day, if there are ethical issues within the community, that's got to be addressed. You can't just ignore that.
So some people have criticized Israel in particular as having policies of an ethno-state. Would you be in favor of, I guess, ethno-state policies in the case of Israel or other countries?
Well, in particular, I'm not in favor of racial policies anyway. I guess I would suggest that maybe we should just have a kind of traditional view on our own countries, as in treat them as we inherited them. I don't think we should have this kind of idea of social engineering, because, like I was saying, the country is a composite of individuals who are in these social groups of families and in wider social groups, and it builds up and outwards from the people on the ground. And as soon as you start taking these views to how we could restructure society, how we should restructure society, then you realize that you're ignoring the will of all of these people, and these people living their lives and doing their best. Like that, you don't have the right to just say, you know what, I'm going to flip all this on its head, or I'm going to change this, or I'm going to change that. So I wouldn't be in favor of any kind of policy that did something like that, including like a racial policy. I'm not in favor of any of these worldviews.
All right. Next one here. The EU allows free trade among its member states, but also imposes other kinds of laws on them. If the EU simply existed as a free trade agreement, allowing the free movement of goods, would you support rejoining it?
No, I'd never support rejoining the EU. The EU should be destroyed. The EU as an institution should go away, and it should return to the nation states of Europe.
All right, let's see here. What do you think of, I'm sure I'm saying this wrong, Starmer?
Keir Starmer. Well, I mean, he was a Maoist when he was young, and he then grew up to become the leader of the Labour Party. So that should pretty much summarise my opinion on him.
All right. The next question we have is from Yama. Do you still play tabletop games?
No, although I find myself seeing a lot of Warhammer stuff on my Facebook feed, and like people painting miniatures and stuff like this, and I've been tempted, but I don't have the time.
Oh. It's a great hobby to pick up during Coronavirus.
I know. Well, and my son's getting to the sort of age where I think he'd enjoy doing the painting and stuff, and he'd probably enjoy playing it as well. Maybe in a couple of years when he's a little bit older. But I think my son would really enjoy it. So there is a part of me that's kind of hoping that he'll get into it and want to do it. And so I've got an excuse for his birthdays to buy him loads of Warhammer miniatures.
Are you particular to a certain faction in Warhammer?
I like a lot of factions in Warhammer. I've had Chaos Tyranids, a few Chaos armies, in fact, different ones. Tyranids, and Orcs, Eldar. I've had all of the armies that aren't the human ones, basically. If I was going to start again, I'd probably do like a custom Marine chapter. I've got it in my head as well how I would do it. I've got a pretty cool color scheme mapped out and everything. I've been thinking about this, right? And I don't doubt that I'll probably end up doing it at some point.
All right, describe the color scheme. I'm actually really curious here.
Well, I like the idea of a kind of I love the Dark Angels models where they're wearing the cloaks and the cloth over them. And I'd repurpose them, and I'd probably do the armor itself in kind of a sort of very burnished gunmetal, so it's like silvery, but not bright, but dull sort of grey gunmetal. So it looked very businesslike, and then I'd have sort of blood red robes over them. That I think that you could do a very, very good paint scheme, and then like something neat for the trim on the armor. I'm not sure what exactly. I'd probably get Dawn of War up and play with the the sliders to see the colours before I chose one. But I think that could be a very striking looking army. It could be a very handsome army along that sort of lines.
That does sound good. It sounds vaguely like a I don't know, a Roman style.
Yeah. Something kind of Romanesque. Yeah, that's right.
All right, so
Probably a
next one.
purple trim, I suppose, on the red robes. No, I say it. Yeah.
Next one is from DK. DK asks, "What do you think of the trade war with China and Australia?"
I hope Australia wins. I know that we saw this the other day. There's been power shortages in Beijing because there's an attempt to punish Australia for their infractions of not submitting to China. They refused like a billion ton shipment of coal or something. It's like you guys really need that coal though. So you know who knows? But I hope Australia wins. Again, in all of this, China is obviously acting like a bully and has to be stopped. We can't allow this to happen.
Um, Freekill asks, "To you, what is the most important personal, family, and societal values that can be had in modern times?"
Most important values. I mean, I think that having yourself and your own material well-being as your highest value is actually a bad thing. I think it might actually be deeply enervating. It turns you into a weak person who essentially should really freeze themselves in stasis and plug their brain into the matrix and then live out a fantasy world in which nothing bad ever truly happens to them. Because what they're essentially trying to do is escape the experience of being a human. Because bad things happen to you. You grow old and you die. This is just a human reality. And most people throughout all of history and most people in the world probably don't consider their own personal safety and personal comfort and personal integrity to be the most important thing ever. This seems to be a particular aspect of the materialistic left in the West, and it's kind of cringe. The more I think about it in this way, because and as soon as you become a father, a parent, you realize, shit, there is actually something more important than me. There is actually, I mean, like for any materialistic Kuma, Globo, Homo, leftist, Destiny fan, and Vaush fan listening, what's more important than your own life? Ask yourself, is there anything more important than your own life? And if there isn't, that's really sad. And I'm not surprised you're nihilistic. I'm not surprised you feel lost and alone, and you've got the inevitable crushing weight of destiny. Well, shouldn't have used that term because that was the guy's name. The inevitable crushing, and then he doesn't weigh anything. He's a fucking tiny guy. The crushing weight of inevitability is looming ahead. The void. You are going to end. Accept it. There are worse things than ending. For example, when you become a parent, the lives of your children are way more important than your own life. It would be a fate worse than death to outlive your own children. I genuinely understand now that I am a father what that means and why parents say that. And the millennial sort of hatred of family and parenthood and children is totally going to be their own undoing, and they're going to regret it later. But at the end of the day, if the only thing they value is their own ability to coom, then you get the nihilism you deserve.
Uh, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would it accurate to say that, roughly speaking, you think that selfishness is, I don't know, not a sin, but a really bad thing, and that people should be selfless?
No, I don't think people should be selfless. Um, Not at least in a categoric manner like that. Obviously, it's a virtue to be selfless, but to demand it and require it as a moral obligation is unrealistic and makes presumptions about people that I don't think you're entitled to. Uh, Everyone is going to act in their own self-interest because they are an agent with demands being made on them by nature. They get hungry, they get tired, they get cold, they get frightened. They have impulses to procreate and to have friend groups and all these things these are all built into what a human being is naturally, biologically, through nature, throughout any particular, whether you ideologically agree with it or not. This is the case. This is what we see, and so to say that someone's selfish, everyone is always trying to fulfill these needs because they have to. They've got no choice. And so it's not selfish to be self-interested. And so selfishness is really just a moral judgment that occurs in a very, very narrow and tiny band of moral decision making, where it's like, are you going to share that cake with your sister on your birthday? You say, no, I'm going to eat this cake for myself. That's selfish. And that is of course wrong, but nobody's saying that, being selfless and having no cake is something that's required of you either. And again, you've identified a very narrow and tiny area of ethical thought that, who cares? It's these are fairly non-important things, because we're not dealing with human beings as they operate in reality every day by their billions, right? So what I'm saying is, obviously, it's what you want to be is virtuous. That's what you want to be. You want to be someone who just makes good, prudent, sensible choices, and who doesn't go to extremes, who doesn't who isn't deficient in moral character, and doesn't spend all their time bragging about their moral character and virtue signaling on Twitter or whatever. Just someone who just does the right thing, makes the right decisions. Just try and be someone who is worthy of respecting, who gets something done. Trying to be more than that is unrealistic.
Right. When you when you were saying selflessness is a virtue, I was trying to see if I could squish you into saying that communism is virtuous, but I don't think I'll get there.
What's selfless about communism? Communism is the demand for everyone else's property by the communist, who invariably doesn't own any of their own. No, there's nothing selfless about communism. It's entirely selfish. And every communist frames it this way. Oh, if I were running it, I would have done it correctly. They should have done it this way. Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. You are not nearly the person to do it. It's counterintuitive to human beings, and it always fails. It's not selfless. It's selfish. I own this property. Why do you have a claim to it? That's the question. You selfish motherfucker. Get out of my face.
All right. Next question is from Kale. What do you think of the Muslim camps in China?
Against? I don't think Chinese should be interning any ethnic group into camps and then brainwashing them, forcing them into labor, breaking apart their families, trying to breed them out of existence. I'm against all of those things. This is the thing. As if anyone would come down on the side of that, on the side of that. Jesus.
Yeah, I'm against.
I think they should be. I think we should be treating China with a lot. Well, I think it would be justified for Western governments to say, well, look, we actually can't do business with China because China is actually an evil fascist state that is going to commit genocides. And I mean, what's the difference between China and Nazi Germany, other than the level of sophistication by which they can control the population? What's the difference, practically speaking? We just haven't had the war with China yet. Okay, great. So we're in 1937 Germany. Great, okay. But yeah.
All right. Next question we have is from Roar10. What are your thoughts on Tommy Robinson, especially in light of his various violence, immigration, or dishonesty-related offenses?
I think that Tommy Robinson's crimes are not unique among working class communities. And this is why we have property rules and property laws. Anything that he's done that's mortgage fraud or anything like that. I'm sure that the convictions are legitimate and he served his time. So what am I supposed to say? You get what you deserve, Tommy. And I've spoken to him about this. He's like, yeah, like these things. It's like a chancer. When he was younger, and everyone does this, Well, not I don't, but a lot of people in working class communities do this, and many of my friends and many of my family members I could point to, I guess, are kind of like this, and it's just it's about being coming from a disadvantaged background. It makes you look for opportunities where you shouldn't be looking because you think you'll be able to get away with them, and when you can't get away with them, you get justly wrapped on the knuckles by the law. This doesn't make him a bad person per se, although there is obviously something wrong with doing this, but I don't want to go into a big moral fucking treatise about it now, so we're 2 hours in. But yeah, no, generally he's quite a nice guy. I've spent a bit of time with him. I've really enjoyed the time with him. He's a funny guy. He's just normal. He just recognized the problem, and this problem just happened to be really politically incorrect. But he's certainly not a racist. I don't think he's a racist at all. I think that he is someone who is just very concerned about the values that are inherent in Islam. And I think there's fair room for concern about that. If there wasn't room for concern about that, why are there security cameras in Saudi mosques?
So the next question is from Bamboo Bob. Bamboo Bob asks, do you think Snowden and Assange should be pardoned?
Yes.
All right, easy enough. Garanor asks, what's your favorite...
We deserve to see what our governments are doing.
All right, next question is from Garanor. What's your favorite Christmas song, and what's your favorite Christmas carol?
I couldn't even name one. I don't really have a favorite Christmas song, because weirdly, I don't like Christmas songs. Like, I like Christmas and everything. I like the time of year, but I never associated it with anything spiritual. For me, it was more temporal. It was more about time to see my family. This certain kind of year and certain atmosphere you have. Put the decorations and trees and stuff like that. But it was a cultural thing, and I like the cultural expression. Obviously, I like having Christmas. I'm very annoyed that Boris Johnson's cancelling Christmas. But I never cared for the songs that were made about it, because it wasn't a deep spiritual thing for me. But I can understand that for people who it is a spiritual thing for, then these things are moving and meaningful. But for me, the other Christmas songs are kind of Coomerish, it's just celebrating consumer culture. I'm not really into that. So I don't really have any that I particularly love, but I'm just used to them. They become part of the backdrop of Christmas time. And so I'm happy that they're on, even if I don't particularly like them.
Alex asks, what football team do you support? And I assume by football team he means soccer team.
I don't know what a soccer is, but there's a game in which men use their feet to kick a ball around. Do you have anything like that in the United States?
Yeah, soccer.
You foreigners and your weird foreign ways. We call it football in the English-speaking world. But yeah, no, I don't support football. I'm not a football fan. I like playing football. Me and my son play football all the time. But I don't watch sports. I'd rather play sports.
All right. Bamboo Bob asks, do you think that protectionism is bad for the economy in the long term?
I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not an economist, but I understand that free trade tends to be an energizing factor that allows the rising tide to raise all boats. But like I said, I'm not an economist, and so I'm going to pass.
All right. Here's another question. Do you think the Patriot Act is an appropriate measure to combat terrorism or in a violation of privacy rights?
Well, I mean, any attempt to combat terrorism is probably definitionally going to be a violation of privacy rights. The question is it justified? Honestly, I'd have to go back and actually see the extent of the Patriot Act. It's been a long time since I looked into it. It's just been law for such a long time now, and it's in a different country that I just didn't tend to think much about it. But I recall at the time being fairly opposed to the measures that they were imposing. But now all these things are normal. It's just normal for them to have these powers. So I can't imagine I'm in favour of it, though.
Oh, there's a fun question here I missed from Wacko Pupil.
Should we make this the last one, yeah?
Sure. Wacko Pupil asks, how did it feel to be milkshaked while campaigning?
Great. Honestly, they couldn't have done us a better service, right? Because we were just putting out our political opinions, and they're not particularly radical, frankly. In fact, the far right, what they mean are traditionalists, essentially, people who just like the country that they're in and that they've inherited. And so it's, we're not, like the people who got milkshake generally aren't people who are demanding something that's outside of the character of the country. And so when the progressive shitheels are like yelling and stuff like that, and then they throw milkshake at you, and it's like, I mean, you can see the pictures of me. I'm just smirking because I would just say, well, so you've got no answer then, because it was whatever I was arguing. It's like, okay, well, this is you ejecting. This is you saying, no, I can't deal with this. I can't talk about these things. I have to resort to violence as a staged pantomime form of violence, of course. No one was harmed by the milkshake, apart from possibly the cleaning bills, but like, no harm was done. And I could have pressed charges against the guy, but I just couldn't be bothered in the end. Because again, it's a nothing, right? But it shows the intolerance and inability of the people who are doing it to argue their case, and the fact that if they felt sufficiently pressured, that would have been a gun or a knife or something like that. It's no different. It's just you're a lot softer, and you don't feel as threatened. But you reveal yourself if you're in favour of that kind of thing, and that's important. Getting people to pin their colours to the mast. We are against tolerance and debate. That's what they're saying. And so that's why I would smirk whenever I got milkshakes, because that's the point I was trying to prove.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure having you on Blue Politics, Sargon.
Thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed answering questions from an audience that isn't necessarily my own, because it's always interesting to see the perspectives of people outside of your own bubble, isn't it? So thanks a lot for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Likewise. You have a good one, man.
Bye.
All right, guys. So I am going to change the channel perms. If you would like to speak in here and give your thoughts, all you gotta do is leave and rejoin the channel, and you'll be able to. You guys should be able to. Is that not working?
Yep, we're good.